Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We continue with our panel with Kim Strassel of the Wall Street Journal, Slate's Jamelle Bouie, plus USA Today's Susan Page, and Peter Baker of the New York Times. Peter Baker, I want to start with you. What was your reaction to that focus group of Trump supporters?
I thought it was really instructive. Very good to hear people talk in a very raw, very honest, very open way. They weren't couching their statements. It was internally inconsistent, of course, at times. Yeah, we don't think he actually means what he says, but we love it, right? Yeah, it's a little kind of crazy, but there'll be people there who will take care of it once he's in office. I mean, they didn't see him as necessarily being 100% what he presents himself to be, and that's okay with them because he reflects, obviously, a broader frustration that they're feeling with the system, with the media, as well as the Republican Party. Frank Luntz asking them whether they would go with him to an independent bid. It has to be shaking the foundations right now of the RNC and the other candidates. And it tells us something that this is a different kind of year and a different kind of candidate.
That line about he doesn't really mean all of this and it'll be different when he's in office is what liberals used to say about John McCain. The liberals who liked John McCain, oh, this stuff he's saying in the presidential campaign, he doesn't really mean all of that. Jamelle, let me ask you, one of the criticisms of the media, of other Republican candidates, has been they don't press Trump on his facts. You know, if only people knew that he wasn't telling the truth in some instances, he wouldn't have all of this support. That doesn't seem to be true, having watched that focus group.
It's not true at all, having watched the focus group, and I actually hesitate to say whether it's ever been true of any candidate ever. I mean, people's partisan attachments are pretty much immune to truth and fact and so on and so forth. No one, very few people, collect information and then make a decision. They've made a decision based off, reasons of tribal belief, reasons of all sorts of beliefs, and then they look for the information to justify it. And one real quick thing I want to say about the panel or the focus group is that my inner social scientist saw basically a living representation of something that many sociologists have been noting over the course of the Obama presidency, which is a distinct rise in racial resentment and anti-Black attitudes in the wake of both 2008 and 2012. So among all groups, all groups of white Democrats, white independents, white Republicans, but especially among white Republicans, there's been an increase in racial resentment, which is sort of a measure social scientists use to determine a person's attitudes about African Americans in particular, but other groups. Trump's supporters show all the hallmarks of people with high levels of racial resentment. They they seem a good number believe that President Obama is un-American or maybe even a Muslim and connected to terrorists. A good number refer to him as arrogant and elitist, which for myself reads very much like uppity as an old insult towards African Americans who have achieved some sort of stature in mainstream society. And so all these things I see in that focus group and connect back to real hard data we have about the change in racial attitudes.
You know, we had Frank Luntz say that if there hadn't been a President Barack Obama, there wouldn't be a candidate Donald Trump. And I think you did hear in the focus group people who are maybe uncomfortable with an African-American president. I bet they are not happy with the rise of Hispanics as such an important new part of the American electorate. Even the climate change treaty, we know from polling that Trump supporters tend not to believe in climate change. So here is a president and a time that has, and a nation that has moved in a direction that's made many of Trump voters generally uncomfortable, and it has fueled his support.
Kim, Governor Kasich says, but this is a small group. It's just a focus group. It's not the Republican Party more broadly. What's your sense of this?
They reflect a general mood of the country. Look, I'm not sure I entirely agree the point about Trump and facts. I mean, he is a brilliant marketer. He's so good at what he does. It was no accident he came out with that Muslim comment the next day after a lackluster speech by a president who looked disengaged and had no new policies for the nation. So he comes out and says this. And he loves it when people then say he's a racist, because it diverts attention away from the policy. The policy, just take aside the politics. It's a bad policy. There's no real way to implement it. There's no proof it would be effective in stopping another San Bernardino. It's potentially a very bad idea. If we want to win against the terrorists in the Middle East, you're going to have to make coalitions with moderate Muslim forces. This does not help us. The pity is that Republican candidates aren't talking about that, because this might actually have an effect on Trump and his presidency.
Why are they not talking about that? They seem a little afraid. Yes, they say bad Trump, but then they move on. There's nobody. Why is that?
I mean, because he just manages to say these things that are so inflammatory that they feel that they have to respond on an emotional level and make some sort of moral statement about Donald Trump. and the rest of it all gets lost. And he loves it when that happens.
Right. Well, go ahead, Jamelle.
Yeah, I think the focus group gives us something of an answer to that. Half of the people there said that if Trump ran as an independent, they would support him. And when you step back, and if you're a Republican official, this is terrifying, right? If for some reason you anger Trump or do something to get Trump on the bad side of the party writ large, and he leaves for an independent bid, you've just torpedoed your party's chances for the White House. And so I think Republican politicians and officials are they're trapped. I'm sure you can look at their body language, what they say, that they really want to just denounce Trump with all the fire in their belly, but they're afraid that if they do, they risk a reaction which they cannot control. And so it's this weird hostage situation.
Well, this may be why, Peter, you have a situation where you have denunciation after denunciation of Trump, and then none of the candidates, no one will say, but if he's the nominee, I won't support him.
Right.
We haven't gotten to that. That contradiction seems pretty strong, but it's there.
Well, it is strong, and like Jamelle said, they don't want to push him out because, in fact, if they do, they know it's over. And so you hear Jeb Bush, who you really have a hard time imagining supporting Donald Trump as nominee, saying, well, they want him to fall of his own weight and then go away. They don't want him to be a continuing protest against the system, because then the system loses.
Yeah, well, good luck with that, because I don't see how you look at developments now and the polling we have now and this focus group and not conclude that either Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee or Donald Trump will be an independent candidate for president. And only now do you see Republican officials trying to grapple with what that means, not only for losing the White House, but for losing Republican control of the Senate and for what it means for the future of the Republican Party itself.
I'm not sure I agree with that, only just because, not that I would deny Trump's support, and he has been consistent, but what we have also seen just in the last few weeks is that, in fact, events can shake up this race quite dramatically. It's still very fluid. Chris Christie is now number 2 in New Hampshire. Ben Carson's support has fallen off dramatically. Ted Cruz in that poll is now leading Donald Trump. And I think as you get closer to these things and some more people drop out of the race, the dynamics shift yet further.
And let's talk about that Trump-Cruz dynamic, because Trump is denouncing the polls that show Cruz on the rise, but watch what he does, not what he says. And let's watch what he said. Let's listen to what he said on Fox News Sunday.
I don't think he has the right temperament. I don't think he's got the right judgment.
What's wrong with this temperament?
Well, you look at the way he's dealt with the Senate, where he goes in there like frankly, like a little bit of a maniac. You're never going to get things done that way.
So he's talking about Senator Ted Cruz there, Peter, and that suggests he feels a little heat from Senator Cruz, because Senator Cruz has not attacked Donald Trump, and Donald Trump says he's only a counterpuncher.
Right. No, Kim was exactly right. Slipstream is a great way of putting the way Cruz has approached Trump so far. He's always said, even if you disagree with him, Donald is great. I don't have the same policy on this, but he's great. There was a leaked private comment in which he said he didn't think Trump had the right judgment. Trump is obviously kind of fighting back in that sense, but it's really the polls, and Trump goes after whoever he sees as a threat, and he now sees Ted Cruz as a threat. It's a little funny to hear Donald Trump suggest that another candidate might have problems with temperament and judgment going into the talk with the Senate, but we've seen all along he'll say what he needs to say.
Kim, do you think that Ted Cruz has a patient strategy he's been playing out here? Is this his moment to grab that? Give us your sense of the Cruz.
He's doing very well. I also think he's got a couple of liabilities, which you saw this week. The fact that he felt compelled to give a national security and foreign policy speech. This goes to one of his clever strategies was way back he was going to get all those Rand Paul voters. There are fewer of them in the Republican electorate post-Paris and post-San Bernardino, and yet he is out there on questions of metadata and a little bit more restrained in terms of his foreign policy. There's a lot of Republican voters who want a very muscular foreign policy leader, and he felt compelled that he had to go in and kind of shore himself up on that in terms of a speech this week. You're going to see in this debate this week, I think a lot of Republicans who are eager to hit him on that. Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and it'll be interesting to see how he does.
Does Marco Rubio, Jamelle, have to do something now? The conversation is now Cruz and Trump. A debate coming up. Marco Rubio has had good debates. He's tried to make something of this NSA vote, or what he sees as Ted Cruz's lack of support for the metadata analysis by the NSA. What's your sense of Marco Rubio?
I think Rubio should just continue doing what he's doing, right? He has a steady increase in the poll. He's been going up slowly, not as rapidly as Cruz in places like Iowa, but there's been a steady increase. He has given great debate performances. He seems to be on everyone's good side in the Republican Party. And so if I were Rubio, I don't think there's any more that you can do at this point other than watch to see what happens with the other candidates. And at a certain point, if Rubio can't get over a hump, it may have nothing to do with Rubio and everything to do with the structure of the Republican primary right now. I will say that there is concern that Rubio is not running as good of a ground game as he could be running. Comments made by Republican officials in Iowa and New Hampshire suggest that Rubio is not spending much time there, and comments from the Rubio campaign suggest that he doesn't think he needs to spend that much time there. And so that to me, if there's anything concerning about Rubio's bid, that to me is it. That I think. I feel like I'm a bit old-fashioned in this regard. I think that in order to win these states, you really do have to invest time and energy and people there. And the Rubio campaign seems to differ. The Cruz campaign, notably, very much believes that you have to invest time and effort and people into winning these states.
Yeah, the idea being that maybe the election is now nationalized and you don't have to do what you used to have to do. Let's not leave without talking, Susan, about a brokered convention, which was usually something we only talk about in our fantasies as political reporters, but now there was some coverage of it this week. What's your thoughts on the idea of a brokered Republican convention?
First of all, I would like to vote in favor of this because how much fun would that be to cover? Not a Republican brokered convention since 1948. It's been a really long time, not in our lifetimes. But I think you could see how it would happen. It would happen with Trump voters going with Trump, evangelical voters going with Ted Cruz. I think Ben Carson's days are over. Who is the establishment Republican candidate? Can that be Rubio? Can establishment Republicans unite behind one candidate that could stand up to the force that is Ted Cruz and Donald Trump? And if you have a three-way split like that, that is the recipe for a brokered convention.
And the idea of a brokered convention is nobody has the delegates when they get there, and therefore it has to be managed in the moment in Cleveland.
You have a second ballot. If a candidate doesn't win on the first ballot, you have a second ballot. And then those people who were elected, delegates elected in primaries, are no longer required to vote for whoever won their primary. So,
but they are under all these complicated rules that go state by state in terms of what you were allowed to do. It's very complicated.
It opens up the doors, though, to the kind of politicking that we haven't seen in quite some time.
Backroom politicking.
Final question to you, Kim. This was seen by certain candidates in the race as an attempt by the establishment to tinker with the process. Is that really what this was?
No, I think from what I understand, some members of the RNC sat down and they were having a discussion about what would happen if this were the case. But people get very, very touchy about stuff like this. I think we got a long way to go before we get to a brokered convention. We've got 14 candidates going into Iowa, but let's see how many actually come out of Iowa on the other end. And this could actually winnow down pretty quick.
Yeah, a good idea to let the voters actually vote before you decide how you're going to work on a way to take their vote away from them. All right, we'll be back in a moment.